of 2002 when he was formally charged with 6 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of abuse of a corpse in the second degree, 1 count of sexual abuse in the first degree, 1 count of attempted rape in the second degree, 1 count of attempted aggravated murder, 1 count of first degree attempted rape, 1 count of sexual abuse in the first degree, 1 count of sexual abuse in the second degree, and 2 counts of sexual abuse in the third degree. This is one of the few cases that when I originally read about it, really upset me. Normally, when I'm reading about true crime or even watching videos about it, I don't feel one way or the other about the victims. This one, however, struck a chord with me for reasons I'm not exactly certain why. And it might be the fact that Weaver committed these atrocities against 2 young children and was able to avoid getting the death sentence, which I firmly believe he should have gotten, by copping a plea bargain and pleading guilty to 2 of the crimes while pleading no contest to the rest of them. Weaver ended up getting 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, which just means that he's going to sit in prison until the day he dies. And again, as I've already stated, I think this guy should have been executed for these crimes. They had more than enough evidence to convict him, and I don't see why they did a plea bargain. I mean, he's really just an awful animal of a human being who doesn't deserve to live. And I'm not the only one who thinks that, because on March 4th, 2007, a inmate at the Snake River Correctional Institute who was working in the barber shop attacked him with a makeshift shank, and he caused neck and shoulder injuries. Unfortunately, Weaver survived the attack, but his level of awfulness doesn't end here. You see, Miranda's younger sister, Miria, began corresponding with Weaver in 2009, and she eventually said that she views him as a father figure, and that she had to know what had happened, at which point Weaver, who, much like a spider, was weaving his web, told her that he had seen Miranda walking to the bus that morning and become concerned that she had witnessed something what he was doing, which, if that were true, I would suspect it involved something with Ashley Pond's corpse. And he had gone down the hill and informed her that Ashley was inside the house and that she wanted to come home, but she needed to see her friend first, at which point he killed her. He also went on to inform Miranda's sister that had he not been caught by the police, he had been eyeing her up as well, which just goes to show the deceitful, manipulative nature of Ward Weaver. I really believe that the whole reason he agreed to talk with the young woman was in order to inflict further mental anguish on her by telling her that she was going to be one of his victims. Few things have been released in regards to the murders of Ashley and Miranda. One of them being that Ashley had at least 5 shots of whiskey in her stomach at the time of death, and this leads me to suspect that Weaver very possibly sexually assaulted both girls before murdering them, and that he may in fact have held them captive for a few days before he killed them. This is a bit of a shorter episode this week, but there is still one twist left in this story, and it involves Weaver's son, Francis, who also has a long criminal history. In 1999, he shot a rifle into a truckload of teens, injuring one of his friends in Shoshone, Idaho, north of Twin Falls. He was charged with aggravated assault, which is a felony, and served several weeks in a juvenile detention facility. At this point, he was living with his father's half-brother. He eventually moved to Oregon to live with his father and his girlfriend, and in October of 2002, he was accused of threatening over the phone to kill his aunt and 2 cousins. Despite these rather serious brushes with the law, Francis Weaver was unable to stay out of trouble. In 2005, he and a friend were arrested for robbery and burglary in an incident in a southeast Portland house, with the story being that he and 2 accomplices had come up with the idea of holding people hostage and then robbing them. It is known that a week earlier he had confessed and been found guilty of possessing large quantities of marijuana with intent to distribute. Although I could find nothing as to a dispensation on the drug charges, Weaver and his friend were both acquitted by a jury in August of 2005. In November of that year, his brother Alex pled guilty to felony attempted assault after he struck an 18-year-old Milwaukee man in the head with a rubber mallet, for which Alex was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Which brings us to February 2014. Francis Weaver, the same son who turned in his father Ward for the murders of Ashley and Miranda, was arrested in the shooting death of a Grants Pass man in Canby in what was described as a drug deal gone wrong. In March of 2016, Francis was sentenced to life in prison for the death of Edward Spengler. Francis and 2 other accomplices had planned to rob Spengler, who was a known drug dealer, as well as murder him. And while it's been confirmed that Francis did not himself pull the trigger in the murder, it has also been acknowledged that he's the one who set up the entire deal and knew beforehand that the man was going to be murdered. And this brings up the case of, nature versus nurture, wherein does somebody become a killer because of their nature or because of how they were raised? And I think in Francis's case, it might be a little bit of both, given what his father had done beforehand, and I'm certain that he knew what his grandfather had done. But it is very odd that all 3 of these men, one after the other, first the grandfather, then the father, then the son, all end up in prison for life. Well, in the case of Francis's grandfather, he's on death row, but they all end up in prison for murder. And it will be just as interesting to see what happens to Francis's brother, who we know went to prison for an assault. It almost seems as though the Weaver family is hardwired to commit acts of violence which ultimately culminate in murder. That is it for this week's Deathcast. Again, I'd like to thank you for joining me and remind you that if you enjoy the show, the best way you can help support it is to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you find your podcasts, and share it with others on social media or someone you know who enjoys true crime. I know this week's episode was a little bit shorter than they have been, but I promise you, the next few weeks I'm going to be having bigger cases, and eventually I'm going to be getting around to a multi-part episode where I cover what is possibly one of the most controversial cases of the latter part of the 20th century, the West Memphis 3. Our book of the week this week is One Horse Open Sleigh by my friend, the fantastic author James Mullaney. It is a comical Christmas whodunit that I think, especially given what's going on in our country today, is really worth the read and will relieve some of the, pent up stress, frustration, and jagged edgedness we have on our nerves during this most unusual holiday season. Until next week, stay safe and stay morbid.
Welcome to the Deadcast.